Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar. Today's webinar is How to Handle Rejection from Disappointment to Redirection to Publication. To get us started today, I'd like to first introduce you to our team of speakers. Um, Jessica Offenberger is a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. She's been working on the How to Do Research and Get Published webinar since its inception in 2020. Next, Robert Tinkle is a publishing editor for Sage, managing a suite of journals in humanities and social sciences. Before Sage, he earned his PhD in English literature from Johns Hopkins University, where he also served as associate editor for the journal English Literary History and directed the JHU Writing Center. Next, Dr. Bonnie Slade is professor of adult education for social change at the University of Glasgow. She's interested in how adult education across a variety of contexts can work as a tool for social change and individual empowerment. Her interdisciplinary research draws on adult education, labor studies, migration studies, gender studies, and arts informed research traditions to explore issues related to informal learning, migration, STEM, and the labor market. She's the co-editor of the Journal of Adult and Continuing Education and was co-creator and program leader of the International Master in Adult Education for Social Change, funded by the European Commission. Next, Dr. Sinead McNally is the Associate Professor at the Dublin City University Institute of Education in Ireland and Editor-in-Chief of Active Learning in Higher Education at SAGE. As a developmental psychologist, Sinead is interested in inclusive learning environments in formal and informal education throughout the lifespan. Starting with children's earliest experiences in early childhood education and extending to learning in primary, post-primary, and higher education, Sinead's research highlights the importance of student voice in shaping educational policy and practice, and the value of relational approaches in supporting the full inclusion of students in education. And to wrap it up, my name is Sean Scarsbrick. I work on the community engagement team at Sage, and my primary role is to support authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process. Before we go any further, I want to just highlight our team's work here. You'll see that the journals that our two guest speakers represent here at Sage. If you think these might be good topics for you, you might be interested to submit a manuscript or join as a reviewer, we definitely encourage you to do so. Throughout today's call, please send us your questions via the Q&A box on your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we possibly can live, but any that are relevant to today's conversation that we haven't gotten to, we will follow up with in a blog post. And just to situate us quickly on a very linear journey for the author journey, we'll move through the earliest stages of securing funding, conducting research and writing, all the way through article promotion and potentially resubmission. Each of the stages here is represented by webinars we've hosted in all of these topics, so we do encourage you to go back and watch recordings if you find anything relevant, and of course, register for upcoming webinars too. And with that, I'm very happy to pass it over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that wonderful introduction. Uh, so, why we're here today and what we're going to talk about. Why is it important to talk about rejection in academia? Researchers face many different pressures from many different sources. The publish or perish culture of academia puts enormous pressure on researchers from graduate school onward to get their research published in a distinguished and well-respected journal. That does not go unnoticed. Publication is important, even essential to complete degree requirements, advance in the tenure process, and throughout your academic career overall, and to build name recognition and an academic brand, so to speak. In many fields, it intersects with funding pressures. The peer review process can be lengthy, increasing the need to get it right the first time when sending manuscripts out for peer review, especially if your research is time sensitive. So, rejection in any setting has psychological as well as practical and material consequences. In academia, the short term impacts might include disappointment, frustration, self doubt. Long term impacts include imposter syndrome and burnout, which might eventually lead someone to leave academia altogether. So today in the webinar, we will discuss the importance of constructive feedback and give you some tools to help turn those negative feelings into positive action and goal setting. Research publishing is a competitive landscape, as you know, and as we've talked about in this series over the years. Top journals like American Economic Review, Journal of the ACM, New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, and Nature tend to accept less than 15%, and for the most part, less than 10% of all of their submissions that they receive. You'll see a quote at the bottom of this slide from Nature's editorial criteria and processes page, indicating that its acceptance rate tends to hover around 8%, with most submissions getting desk rejected. Even if these journals are some of the most competitive out there, many journals still tend to fall in the 20 to 30% acceptance range, which means most submissions will not even be accepted. Thus, rejection is normal and indeed an expected outcome of submitting your research for peer review. If you're rejected from a journal with a 10% acceptance rate, for example, you're in good company. You are definitely not alone. Even established researchers and academics continue to face rejection throughout their careers. You might be surprised of how many now celebrated papers were initially rejected by one journal or another, or faced many rounds of revisions before finally being accepted. Remember, persistence matters more than a single decision. Acceptances or rejections happen on a case by case basis and can be unpredictable, subjective, and imperfect. It is easy to get discouraged by rejection, but contextualizing the rejection within the competitiveness of your field can help you pick yourself up and move forward. So, every journal is different, as we've already kind of talked about. There is significant variation in terms of their readership, the content that they publish. Some journals are very niche, while others are broad and multidisciplinary. Um, Accessibility. Some journals publish behind a paywall or are only available via subscription, while others are fully open access. And majority, or quite a few, are hybrid, a mix of both subscription and open access business models. Journals vary in age, the level of establishment in the field, and so on. So, with that in mind, their acceptance rates will also vary, often based on these factors. It's worth considering all of the factors that are in play here, whether you are uh, shopping for a target journal or just even trying to figure out the best home for your research. A journal that publishes in a niche area might have a relatively higher acceptance rate since its pool of applicants is more self-selecting. We have a great webinar on how to select a journal in case we want to dive into this in more detail. Note that a growing percentage of submissions are rejected before peer review due to ethical concerns such as misuse of AI tools. IOP Publishing in their highlights report from 2024 states that an estimated of 5 to 10% of manuscripts are rejected due to ethical concerns before they even get into the peer review process. Many stage journals, you may have seen this already, publish acceptance rates along with other useful peer review metrics, citation, and usage data in the journal overview and metrics tab of the journal homepage. And this data can give you a good sense of how competitive the journal actually is. So why do papers get rejected before peer review? Many submissions are rejected before reaching the peer review stage. This is known as desk rejection. It may be that, as we talked about, there's ethical concerns, but it could be as simple as the manuscript does not fit within the journal's aims and scopes. In other words, it's not the kind of thing the journal publishes. Before you submit, make sure your paper fits within the journal's scope. Perhaps the topic falls within the journal's aims and scope, but is simply not a priority for the journal at this time for any number of reasons. Perhaps the editor recently published a similar paper and wants to space out papers on that topic. Make sure you're also reading the journal's manuscript submission guidelines carefully before submitting. The manuscript guidelines provide valuable information on the formatting, citation style preferred by the journal, and a host of other concerns. You'll also want to make sure that the journal publishes your article type. Maybe you are submitting a case report. If the journal does not accept case reports or case studies, your paper will be desk rejected right out of the gate. If the paper is not rejected, it might be unsubmitted for you to make various formatting changes and meet the formatting requirements for the journal. Once you make those corrections, you can resubmit and re-upload your files to the manuscript submission portal. The editor will then decide if the paper should be desk rejected or sent out for peer review. Oftentimes, manuscripts will be rejected if the manuscript needs significant editing, like in terms of spelling and grammar. While the journal's copy editing team will perform basic editing, if the manuscript is not easily readable and digestible by peer reviewers, the editor will request that the manuscript receive additional editing before being reconsidered. Sage, for instance, provides language and editing services for a fee through our Sage Author Services. Beyond spelling and grammar, you'll also want to ensure that your submission is clear, well organized, and written in a voice that is appropriate to the journal. Voice can be hard to pin down or define, but before you submit, read other articles published by the journal and ask yourself if your submission belongs or fits with them, not only in terms of content, but also of written presentation and style. We have a great webinar on how to write and structure a manuscript, which we also recommend viewing. Continuing on, novelty is key in academia, and so is mastery of the existing literature in the subject. So, by novelty, I mean of argument, of research design or methods, of the overall approach, of conclusions. So, your article is more likely to be successful if you add or contribute in a meaningful way to the existing research, extending the field further in one direction or another. This requires A, demonstrating that you understand and can succinctly synthesize in the existing research, and B, demonstrating how you are challenging, building on, reframing, or otherwise bringing something new to this existing research. If it is not apparent from the abstract or the first sections of the article itself that your submission is offering a substantive contribution to the field, it will likely be desk rejected before making it to peer review. Concerns around conflict of interest, these must always be disclosed with your submission, and the journal editor may decide to desk reject your article if there are significant concerns with financial, affiliative, or other conflicts of interest, or COI. Talked about this briefly already. Make sure your research and your submission is not compromised by research ethics concerns such as inappropriate use of AI, plagiarism, or so forth. Any use of AI in research or writing must be disclosed. For any research involving human subjects, you must provide an informed consent statement and ensure that your study has been evaluated by a qualified research ethics committee. Research involving animal subjects also required that specific ethics protocols be followed. Most SAGE journals are members of COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, which provides valuable guidance on a huge number of research ethics issues. Finally, a paper may be desk rejected due to concerns about one or more of the authors. Public controversies or a history of unethical or unprofessional behavior may disqualify the submission. Once a paper goes through peer review, next slide, please, Sean. Um, Once a paper goes through peer review, it's possible you may face a rejection. In this instance, the reviewers were probably not convinced of the contribution to the knowledge base or the novelty of the argument. Relatedly, reviewers may determine that the submission does not demonstrate adequate mastery of the existing literature on the subject or commits errors in its representation of the existing literature. Perhaps the methods are not robust enough for the journal or are flawed in some other way. Reviewers may also decide that specific sections are weak. Weak methodology could be, for example, too few observations in quantitative studies or lack of transparency of qualitative methods in qualitative studies. Maybe your paper was ill-focused or written poorly in their opinion. Excessive grammatical errors, unclear writing or organization, or even improper voice can contribute to such judgment. Make sure your abstract is succinct and well written, and that you have very clearly included all necessary components of your argument. Your readers should have a firm grasp of what you are arguing and demonstrating, and importantly, why you have argued it. What's the motivation? What's the contribution to your field? Note that editors rely on 2 or 3 external peer reviewers for advice and judgment to help inform their decision. Even if one reviewer leaves positive feedback, your paper might still be rejected based on the assessment of other reviewers. So, how do we respond to an unwanted rejection? First things is just to take a minute to cool off. Take a beat, sit with your emotions, and try to fairly and thoughtfully digest the feedback you've received. Can you see where the reviewers are coming from? Do you agree with at least some of their comments and final assessment? If there are things that you disagree with, avoid the temptation to respond right away and never lash out to reviewers, even if their identity is known, or to the journal editor. Let things sit for a few days as you feel and reflect. As you sit with these editor and reviewer comments, take stock of the scale of suggested changes and edits. What major and minor adjustments are needed? Has a core problem been identified? Are changes needed to the methodology, novelty, organizational structure, presentation of the evidence, or language and clarity? What should you plan to tackle first, second, third, and so forth? If it's helpful, make an outline of all the things you'd like to edit or rework about your submission based on reviewer feedback and organize these items by degree of importance. This will be a helpful rubric as you plan to revise your work. I encourage you to be systematic. Decide what is more or less important as you begin to revisit your submission and make changes. Comb through reviewer comments carefully and make sure you are responding to each one. The more systematic that you can be in the editing and revision process, the more likely you are able to find success in the next rounds of decision making. If you choose to reach out to the journal editor or other representatives of the journal, keep your correspondence polite and professional. It's generally discouraged to contest a reject decision, although there are sometimes valid reasons for doing so. If you do, make sure you are respecting the editors and or reviewers' expertise and the time that they have put into their review and decision making. You want to thank them for their time and consideration. It's perfectly normal to feel disappointment, but keep your focus on those future opportunities and on what you are going to do to move your research forward. Is there another journal you can submit to? What changes can you make to strengthen your submission? Remember that rejection is a necessary first step forward to improvement. As I talked about, the acceptance rate can really vary from journal to journal, 5% to 50%, depending on the journal, discipline, and topic. As we've seen, some journals like Nature and Science have a very high rejection rate due to the sheer number of submissions they receive. Even if you want to publish in a high impact journal, do remember that it is more important to focus on the readership of the journal and who your audience is. You might end up publishing in a niche journal in your field, but then your article reaches the right audience. Over to you, Robert.
Great. Thanks so much, Jessica. So sort of continuing on in that same vein, we're going to talk about handling rejections, sort of both emotionally, but also in terms of sort of strategizing for how to take that rejection and move forward. So again, it's extremely important to carefully read all reviewer comments in the editor's letter, keeping in mind that criticism is a tool. As uncomfortable as it may be, as much as it may sting in the moment, it really is a tool that is meant to help you enhance your paper. And that's just because, in part, having that additional set of eyes on your work is really crucial to identifying, gaps, flaws, oversights that you may have missed. As authors, we're very close to the work. You're sitting with it all the time, and you just sometimes miss things that a fresh set of eyes can see in your work. So it's important not to become defensive or take things too personally, and just keep in mind that criticism really is there to help you and to make the paper better. So with that in mind, take the rejection in stride. Don't take it personally. And remember that some journals, as we've seen, only accept 5%, 10% of submissions or fewer. Very, very few. So in some cases. So knowing that acceptance rate may help you to sort of put a rejection in context. You want to kind of, focus on why the manuscript was rejected, but also be able to keep that bigger picture in mind and put that rejection in its larger context. You may resubmit, you may end up resubmitting to the same journal after revising your piece, but in most cases, after a rejection, there's probably another journal that would be a better fit for your paper after you make those recommended revisions. So again, use this as an opportunity to strengthen your submission. You might not be able to address all comments, but you really should make a sincere effort to incorporate all the feedback you receive and use it to improve the paper. Keep in mind too that if and when you do go to submit to another journal, your paper may very well be read by the same reviewers, even at another journal, without you being aware. Especially if you're working in a more kind of niche subject area where the pool of qualified reviewers is a lot smaller. That happens all the time. So you might get feedback from one journal. The reviewers may sort of recommend, make certain recommendations. And if you don't follow that advice and then go to submit to another journal, it might be that the same reviewer sees that piece again and is just going to have to say the same thing over again. So it really is important to incorporate that feedback, which again is meant to make your work even stronger. Okay, so here we're going to talk about a little bit about retooling based on rejection type. Across a career, you're going to probably get many different kinds of rejections, so the strategy is going to have to be mixed as well. But in general, we can sort of group these based on desk rejections versus peer review rejections. So if you find that you tend to have papers desk rejected more often than not, it's a good idea to make sure you're devoting a lot of time to reading the journal description and aims and scope very carefully. Again, very good, very strong research gets rejected simply because it's not the right fit for the journal you submitted to. That's sort of the number one reason editors give for desk rejecting is just it's that question of fit. So you want to really make sure that you are submitting to a journal with the appropriate aims and scope for your research. If the submission system allows you to attach a cover letter, it's a really good idea to do so because that cover letter is your opportunity to kind of make a case for your article and explain to the journal editor why your submission is the right match for that journal. So if the abstract is kind of your opportunity to outline your argument and give that overview of the argument itself, the cover letter is really your opportunity to kind of make that case for why this article belongs in this journal. So submitting a cover letter is highly encouraged. Sometimes it's required, and in other cases, it's highly encouraged. As you're getting ready to submit, just like you did in the process of all the writing and research that you did, make every effort to improve the quality of your manuscript, try to be objective about your work, and make sure that you're writing for that journal's particular audience. Every journal kind of has its own readership, so make sure that you're sort of writing for that audience, tailoring your research to that audience. Again, read the aims and scope carefully, and also make sure that you're including statements related to submission funding, conflicts of interest, any kind of ethical approvals. Even if you have nothing to declare, it's really important to state that in your end statements and state up front that there's nothing to declare in one area or another. So make sure that all of that is included as you submit. It's also a really good idea for more insight into journal priorities to sort of read several articles from the journal, especially the more recently published ones, to kind of find out what's being published recently. Frankly, the aims and scope doesn't always give you a perfectly accurate picture of sort of what's going on with the journal, and editorial priorities do shift around, even in sort of subtle or nuanced ways. So reading some more recent articles from the journal really kind of help you to gain kind of an intuitive sense of how articles in this journal are structured, how they're written, what the voice tends to sound like, and then also kind of gives you a little bit of insight into what the journal cares about right now, which may or may not be perfectly captured in the journal description or aims and scope. So ask yourself, is your piece the kind of article that can be shaped into something the journal might accept, or is there another outlet that might work better? Feel free to, I think some people have qualms about this, but always feel empowered to reach out to the journal editorial office for advice to see whether your manuscript might be a good fit. You should feel free to send over an abstract and maybe a brief outline to the editor to sort of help determine that. That certainly won't guarantee acceptance, and you may or may not hear back. It really just depends on the editor. So this is not kind of a foolproof method, but don't be shy about reaching out to the editor. It saves everybody time if the editor is able to return a response to you and say, hey, I think this maybe isn't right for this journal, or yes, I think this could work. And then you can sort of feel more empowered to more formally submit. You can also confer with colleagues, maybe who have submitted to the journal in the past, or maybe you know someone, or you know someone who knows someone who's on the editorial board, who maybe can shed some light on what the journal's priorities are at any given time. And finally, as Jessica said in a previous slide, make sure you're really carefully reading manuscript submission guidelines for your target journals and follow them. We really can't emphasize enough how much editors appreciate the effort you put in. Every journal sort of has its own idiosyncrasies when it comes to manuscript guidelines. And so editors really do appreciate the effort you put into following sometimes sort of even nitpicky journal requirements. If you don't follow the guidelines, there's a good chance your paper can be unsubmitted and sent back to you for adjustments before it even is able to enter the peer review process. Okay, so that's for desk rejections. If you find that you tend to be rejected sort of after the desk rejection stage and at the peer review stage, you're going to want to identify core issues that have been raised by the reviewers and devise a plan of action. When you're at this stage of feedback, you do have the advantage of typically more direct and more thorough comments than you would normally get sort of at the desk rejection stage. So take that feedback seriously and use it to your advantage to help improve your situation. Note that a paper is rarely accepted outright with no needed changes. It almost never happens, in fact. You're much more likely to either get a rejection or a revise and resubmit. So whatever the outcome might be, make a revision timeline for yourself and be sure that you're addressing all reviewer comments, whether it's a rejection or a revise and resubmit decision. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit here about understanding reviewer feedback. So if you do get that revise and resubmit decision and you have that opportunity to address reviewer comments, congratulations. That's a really encouraging sign. Again, it's not a guarantee of acceptance, but it's a very positive sign that the reviewers and the editor see potential in your work and that they are taking the time to help you to get it to a place where it is publishable. Even if the requested revisions are sort of quote unquote major, it's a very encouraging positive sign to get an R&R. Again, it's extremely rare for papers to be accepted without any revision, so most likely you'll see that your paper was either an accept pending major revisions or an accept pending minor revisions. So the first step here is to respond to those reviewer comments, understand the feedback you've received. Typically, major revisions will include substantial changes to things like your study design or your data analysis or maybe interpretation of results. More minor revisions might include things like grammar or formatting or stylistic issues, that kind of thing. So you want to kind of prioritize the major revisions. So begin with the major revisions, group similar comments together so that they're easier to tackle, and then you can sort of address the more minor revisions at the end of that process. Okay, so we've talked about handling rejection. Now we're going to talk about handling revision. So again, read those reviewer comments and editor's letter very carefully and do your best to make the recommended changes. Once you're ready to submit, you're going to want to clearly demonstrate what you've changed point by point. So take care to address all reviewer comments and address each referee point in a separate document. We do recommend highlighting the changes you've made in the document so that it's really easy for the reviewers and the editor to go back and actually see what you've changed. It just makes it easier for them to do that point-by-point comparison. So you might have a highlighted revision and then maybe also a clean revision so that the clean revision can ultimately, if your paper is accepted, will sort of be the version that production goes on to use for final publication. But it is helpful to have that highlighted version as well, again, so that it's really easy to see kind of that you've addressed all comments and what changes you've made at different points in your paper. If you can't meet all criticisms, or maybe you disagree with the advice you've received on a particular point, this happens all the time, really make sure you're explaining why, because again, it's imperative to address every point. So if you do decide not to make a suggested change, you'll want to acknowledge the comment and then explain why you decided to keep that aspect of your manuscript intact, or maybe go a different direction with the recommendation that was made. In terms of tone, make sure that you're always responding in a positive and polite tone. Thank the reviewers for their time and effort. Believe it or not, I've heard from editors that some authors at this stage can become, and I think it comes from a place of really, believing in your work and being proud of your work. So sometimes, at this stage, authors can get defensive or argue with the reviewers on a particular point. Maybe they feel their paper wasn't understood in one way or another. Even if that's how you feel, it is important to sort of maintain that professionalism, that polite tone. Really keep your tone rather than defensive. You want to make sure your tone is collaborative and productive, and that you're really working with the reviewers and the editor to improve your draft and make it ready for publication. And understand finally that the revision process can take 2 or 3 iterations. So don't be discouraged if you make a bunch of major revisions, you send the paper back and you get yet another revise and resubmit. That's not necessarily a sign that you're on the wrong path or anything. It's just part of the process. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 iterations. It's an iterative process. So sometimes it takes 2 or 3 attempts to kind of really get the draft to a place where the journal feels like it's ready to be published. So just sort of trust that process and keep going forward with it. We do have another webinar on how to respond to reviewer comments. If you're interested in sort of more on this topic, it's on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube and search how to respond to reviewer comments, it should pop right up. So I do encourage you to check that out too if you're interested. Okay, so now kind of on the more sort of personal side of things, we're going to talk about sort of digesting, reframing, and looking forward. So again, we've said it already, but it can't be overstated. Academia is really competitive, and rejection is totally normal. It's very common. It's ubiquitous, in fact. It's really important to contextualize a rejection. Know that a single rejection or even multiple rejections is in no way an indictment of your ability, your skill, your potential, your suitability, your belonging in academia. So don't let it, create or reinforce imposter syndrome for you. Instead, take the rejection in stride. It helps to remind yourself, I think, that you are doing research at a very high level in a very competitive industry. And again, everyone faces rejection under those circumstances. And rejection from a journal does not define you or your potential. Again, the research might be totally solid, really strong. It might just be the wrong fit for the journal you submitted to. So there's all kinds of reasons, papers get rejected, and it's important to keep those in mind. So operate with a growth mindset. Remember, it might sound cliche, it might sound cheesy, but it really is true. Every no does open the door to a yes. So don't let a no shut you down. Instead, realize that, there's an opportunity here, and sort of, reframing rejection as opportunity, I think is really important, because that work that you're going to put into learning and growing and improving your article will really pay off. Rejection by one journal may very well lead you to publish in another journal that's actually better suited for your goals, your skill set, your intended audience. So again, rejection can open doors. Be resilient. Again, this field is very large. It's very competitive. That means that everyone, even seasoned researchers, importantly, face setbacks. This is not something that just goes away as you progress through your career. Even very seasoned researchers face rejection all the time. So it's just it's part of the process. It just comes with the territory. So remember that it's not the setbacks that define you. It's your response to those setbacks. Even if you're rejected from your dream journal or your #1 selected journal, don't catastrophize. That could only lead you to further stress. So again, sort of contextualize that rejection, put it in the framework of the bigger picture, and hopefully that will sort of help you to manage those feelings a little better. It's really important to have open and honest and frank conversations. And even by you being here today, I mean, this is a really great step forward. Rejection is really difficult to talk about. There's a lot of embarrassment and shame sometimes that attaches to it. So I think having those open conversations with colleagues, with friends, with family, with other support networks will really help you to reaffirm just how universal rejection is. If we don't talk about it with each other, sometimes we don't know just how universal and ubiquitous it is. So having those conversations will clarify that for you. And in these conversations, don't be afraid to be vulnerable, to share the setbacks you've faced. Again, through these conversations, you'll see just how common rejection is, and your support networks will hopefully offer helpful emotional and/or practical guidelines for how to deal with that disappointment and move forward. So really lean on your communities and keep in mind that you're not facing these challenges alone. And finally, relatedly, seek advice from mentors, from colleagues, advisors. If you're connected to a university, you have institutional resources like career centers or writing centers that can be very helpful, especially if a lot of your rejections maybe are based on language difficulties, or maybe English isn't your first language, or maybe you're having some trouble structuring kind of a long 20-page plus argument. Something like a writing center can be very helpful. Or also, we do have a suite of Sage author services that I would really recommend checking out. They offer all kinds of help from copy editing to plagiarism checks to language retooling. So that can also be a really good resource for you to lean on. Okay, so just diving a little bit more into the importance of a growth mindset. I think one of the first, but maybe also the hardest steps in this, in maintaining a growth mindset, is being able to really sit with your disappointment and all of those negative feelings without letting that slow you down or cause you to question your fitness for academia or something like that. You really want to sort of lean in, but also learn from your disappointment. And that's because rejection is valuable data, right? It's not a comment on you or your abilities or your character. It's actually really just the first step in identifying opportunities for growth. So that reject decision is meant to make your manuscript even stronger, and it's highly valuable feedback, again, especially if you haven't had too many eyes on your work, maybe until now. So having that feedback, even if it comes in the form of a rejection, it can be very helpful. You want to focus on the things that are within your control, not the things that are outside of your control. So ask yourself, what can I change? If the manuscript wasn't the right fit for a journal, it's within your control to submit to a more suitable journal. If it was rejected on the basis of poor grammar, maybe poor structure, it's within your control to seek out some of those language editing services that we talked about on the previous slide. So don't get stuck in negative thinking, but use that feedback to sort of positively action your manuscript into its next stage of development. It's also within your control to kind of look for patterns and find patterns across, a series of rejections. Are you getting the same kind of feedback from multiple reviewers? If so, it's probably not a fluke or an idiosyncrasy of one reviewer's outlook. There's probably something there to really kind of to work on, right? So be strategic about what you prioritize. And again, as we talked about already, sort of prioritize those major revisions before tackling the minor ones. And it's really crucial just emotionally to sort of separate yourself from your manuscript. I know it can be hard to do because it's something maybe you've been researching and working on and writing for a very long time, but you are not, sort of coextensive with your work or with your manuscript. And keep in mind that there are many variables that are influencing an editor's decision, everything from fit to sort of timing to the journal's editorial agenda, finite publication space. Editors, for their part, have to make very hard decisions due to limited space and a high volume of submissions. So this is why you should never take a rejection personally. There's a lot that goes into the calculation. And getting kind of trapped in that space can sort of hinder your growth mindset and prevent you from being strategic as you move forward. So use your knowledge of all of these variables that affect editorial decision making to your advantage. It's really useful to kind of put yourself in the editors and the reviewers' shoes from time to time to sort of better understand their decision making. What variables are they juggling, and that will kind of help you tailor your own process for eventual success. And finally, it's important to understand the quote unquote long game. As an academic, you are really building a body of work over time. And so your career is probably not going to hinge, for good or for bad, on one publication. So a rejection of one manuscript or even repeated rejections should not prevent you from revising, resubmitting, and growing in your thinking and research. So keep that long game in mind. It will help you it will prevent you from sort of overstating or over-determining individual setbacks. Okay, and finally, my last slide here. We said throughout that a rejection doesn't have to be final, so we're going to sort of make it on that and talk about opportunities to resubmit and alternative publication venues. So at Sage, we do have a tool called Sage Path, which is one avenue for sort of resubmitting to a peer journal. Often the editor-in-chief will take it upon themselves to sort of put your submission through Sage Path. If they determine that your submission is very strong and is very good work, but maybe just not the right fit for their journal, they might use Sage Path to refer your work to another journal. And we see thousands of Sage Path referrals every year, so it's a very actively used tool. We also recommend that you use the Sage Journal Recommender tool. This will help you find journals that might be a good fit for your work. It's really easy. All you have to do here is fill out an online form with some information about your submission. So that'll include, your working title, keywords, and then you'll make a selection from a subject area dropdown. And that search tool will actually produce a list of titles that may work well for your research, just based on your keywords and the keywords that are showing up in your title. So that kind of can work hand in hand with SagePath as far as kind of opening up the range of options that are available to you. If appropriate, this kind of varies by field. Some fields use preprints much more than others, but if appropriate, you may consider posting your work to a preprint server. For those of you that maybe aren't familiar with preprints, these are non-peer reviewed, so they don't necessarily carry the same, let's say, prestige as a traditional journal publication, but they are really useful in getting eyes on your work, especially since most preprint servers are fully open access and allow for rapid dissemination of your research. A lot of preprint servers have sort of a comment function, so other researchers can actually see your preprint, comment on it, give you feedback. So it's a really good way to get that feedback and make maybe changes or improvements before you go to sort of submit to a more traditional journal that and go through the peer review process. Preprints also do receive usually a what's called a digital object identifier or DOI, so that makes them fully citable as part of the scholarly record. And again, they're editable and they can sort of go through multiple iterations. So it's a good kind of maybe stepping stone toward sort of quote unquote full publication and the peer review in a peer review journal. Always take advantage of conference opportunities, seminars, workshops, other collaborative venues to sort of share and sharpen your work. This might come in the form of formally presenting your work with a Q&A, or maybe just more informally dialoguing and networking with fellow researchers. But in any case, these venues give you a really good opportunity to solicit feedback and get some fresh ideas about your work and get other eyes and ears on your work before you formally submit. Again, we'll say it again. Rejection is rarely final. Be persistent. Keep your options open. You always have the opportunity to resubmit or to consider some of these alternative publication options. And finally, just a quick note: never submit a manuscript to more than one journal at a time. There's a lot of reasons for this, but it's considered a highly unethical practice in sort of the journal submissions space. So don't be tempted to kind of game the system in some way by sending one paper out to multiple journals and kind of seeing who bites. You want to really make sure that you're just submitting to one journal at a time. That's really kind of the ethical standard in this area. Great. So with that, I will pass it on to I think Bonnie. Are you going first?
Yep, I'll follow you on that.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you, Robert and Jessica, for such an amazing overview of every single aspect, of all the years of experience that I have in academia, which is over 25 now. You really excellent points there. And I recommend anyone to review this over and over again, because these are quick things to say, but they're really based on a lot of wisdom. And really, they come up again and again with the journal that I co-edit. So, they're really, really great stuff there. And I guess I wanted to chip in and just sort of say, really to highlight that it isn't a personal indictment, of your abilities as a scholar, as a researcher, as an activist. It's not anything, an indictment, to go through this peer review process and get some challenging feedback. It happens to all of us. And I guess one reason I was interested in being on this webinar when I was asked is that as I've gone through my career, and I'm a professor now at the University of Glasgow and co-editor of the Journal of Adult and Continuing Education. It's just more and more obvious to me that while it's not like there's no objective personal thing, it is about people. And, they are people, the editors are people, reviewers are people. And, that's, I think when you personalize the process in that way, it can help to understand what's going on. And I also encourage you to think about your own CV at this point. Think about what you have on LinkedIn or on any sort of social media profile where you put your publications or your work. How many things have you been involved with or tried to do that didn't make it there compared to what's on there? And I think for me, I applied 3 times, for example, in Canada for a SSHRC doctoral scholarship, so for funding for the PhD. I applied 3 times and I got lucky on the third. I think, like Jessica said, persistence is so important. And just learning and talking to people about what they did. And, so it's the same with publishing, to really have confidence in your work. And we look at the Journal of Adult and Continuing Education. We look at, new empirical research is so exciting. It's, the edge of the field. So we really want to get exciting stuff in. We really want to publish things. But I can tell you that often, and very often, we get manuscripts in, and none of the keywords are adult education, adult learning, vocational education, so the scoping is also super important as well. We pass on through Sage Path, to the right journals, but think about it. Is it really more about higher education? Is it really more about curriculum studies? Is it, so that's super important because you can waste time by not engaging with the right journal in the first place. Yeah, so I guess those are just my opening comments, but we can say more. I can say more in the questions when that comes up, but I'll pass on over to Sinead.
Thanks so much, Bonnie, and thank you so much, Jessica and Robert, for just an incredible overview of the key considerations in publishing and peer review. There is actually nothing left to add in terms of those details. And similar to Bonnie, I suspect several of my students are on the call. These are the discussions we have. These are the things that we want for early career researchers in particular who may be new to the process. So I absolutely would say those slides are worth printing and keeping beside you on the desk if you're writing and if you're getting involved in publishing for the first time. I suppose I'm editor-in-chief of Active Learning in Higher Education, which is one of those journals which has those incredibly high submission rates, and it's just going one direction, upwards. So last year we went above 1,000 submissions, and looking at the rate this year, I'd say it will be 1,200 by the end of the year. Desk rejects are sadly a big part of this journal, simply because we don't have capacity in terms of reviewers. So we have limited pool of reviewers that we can go to. So meeting the journal scope is really important, and the aims, and also advancing knowledge becomes increasingly important because of the limited space to publish. So one of the things that Jessica and Robert talked about there, which I think is really important, is the cover letter becomes really, really central for especially a busy journal, because you'll stand out, first of all, and second of all, it's really important that it's not a generic cover letter. So it's not just copying and pasting the abstract in. I get lovely emails and messages from colleagues and friends just asking what to do about certain journals or certain revisions. And that's one of the things I would always say. If you can show in your cover letter quite confidently why your paper is a good fit, why you know that journal, you're going to increase your chances of going for review, being sent for review. And then that increases your chances of acceptance as well, because it's a big milestone to get sent for review. The one thing I would say is, again, to reiterate, like, editors are seasoned researchers. So we are trusting in the process, aren't we, Bonnie? We're sending our papers out to other reviewers. We're putting our faith in the system, sending our papers out. So just as an example that might be helpful in terms of, responding to those revisions and rejections, I remember working with a student quite recently around a paper that we loved. We both thought really highly of it. We were very passionate about the subject. And when we submitted it to a journal that we thought was a really good fit, after some consideration, the editor team came back to say, actually, essentially, the hidden message in their feedback was, we don't like it. We don't like the approach you've taken, and we don't like it. So I remember my student was quite like, oh my goodness, they don't like us, they don't like what we're about. And I was like, well, it's really important feedback. And it was one of those instances where I advised we wouldn't go back to the editors and say, maybe you could consider this because actually, here are the reasons we think it's important. But I said, paradigm-wise and the approach, it's really good to know that there is this view, and this journal holds this view around this way of thinking and this kind of theoretical approach. And so let's look at another journal. But crucially, we did take on that feedback. And so I love that quote that all feedback is valuable data. It really is. And that's what I said to my student at the time. All feedback is good feedback. Even the feedback that makes you go, oh my goodness, they really don't like what we're about. And so when you're experienced and you're doing this a lot, as myself and Bonnie are, it's fine. It doesn't bother us. But we know what that is like to bring our students through this, our early career research team through this. So it is so valuable to think about it as all data. And if you're finding that hard, I would say that relational piece is really important. And Robert and Jessica were talking about not letting it knock you, because, that's not what we want. We don't want that emotional response or that, really, really disappointment that leads to dropping out of academia or feeling like it's not for you. So one of the key things I would say is to work then with a more experienced academic, or to seek out that advice. So some of the submissions, or many submissions I see to the journal, I'm not sure how connected the researcher is who's leading the paper to the rest of the team. Have they reached out to go, is this really hitting the mark? Are there things that I can do to improve it? And sitting with that, because that is really important learning. So it can be constructive, but you might need to reach out for support for a more experienced researcher in that instance. So I'm going to stop on that point. And maybe we'll look at questions.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to go into questions in just a moment, but before we do so, um, I would like to flag we have some more webinars happening in the near future. So we've got one in 2 weeks for anybody here who studies engineering or material sciences. That one's for you on March 25th. We'll be having a webinar on neurodiversity in April, and then also one about how to do publicly impactful research, honing in on SDG related work. So lots of interesting things happening. At Sage, we call it our Information for Authors Hub. Lots of information here for anybody looking to publish or who has already published. There's pre-publication support and post-publication work. So any question you've got, this is the place to come to get started. We also have an author newsletter. This goes out once a quarter. We send information about upcoming webinars, the latest on our resources, and anything that will impact you as an author. So if you're interested, I'll leave this on the screen, and please do sign up. We have, I will say, too many questions for us to address live. There are too many good ones. But I think if we can get started first, I have a question for, just pulling up, sorry. Bonnie and Sinead, I think if we can maybe kick off with the two of you. Somebody's asked, from an editor's perspective, what are the most common but avoidable mistakes that lead to a desk rejection?
Start, Sinead? Or I would say that not even it being out of scope. Literally not being on the scope of the journal. And that those are easy to see, that they're about higher education, or they're about curriculum, or they're about other things. So really check that out. And actually, we never mind getting an email from anybody saying, "Hey, I've got this paper. It's this research. It's about this. Is that in scope?" I don't know if they're all editors are like that, but we definitely would, screen that. But that's the major thing. It's just it's not and targeted to the right journal.
Absolutely. For example, I might see papers submitted around post-primary, secondary education, and our journal is all about higher education, just about universities and colleges. It's right there in the title of the journal, so that's not going to be sent for review. But also then, the title is really important. It gives a good indication of whether the researcher has a good command of knowledge around the area. The literature that's considered, the abstract, the way it's written. So it is that sense of confidence, and where I would say the cover letter really comes in as very important. So if there's an opportunity to submit a cover letter, submit that, but not a generic general one that shows why you have done the groundwork and that that this is the journal for you and for your work. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both very much. I've seen a lot of questions coming through about desk rejection generally. And so folks are interested, if my article is desk rejected, will I ever learn why it was desk rejected? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I feel I should go first there, Bonnie, as somebody who does a lot of desk rejects, sadly. So I'm one of those people. I apologize to everybody on the call. I promise we're really nice people on the other side of that screen. Um, but yeah, I mean, so in the desk reject, I've played around with various templates and ways to do this. It's very hard to give that feedback for a desk reject, but read that email very carefully. In my instance, it's usually around aims and scope, or that if the paper was within the aims and scope, it doesn't sufficiently advance knowledge. And if that's the case and it's a desk reject, if I see, for example, an early career researcher, and I do look at papers, particularly ones that are borderline, or I think that there's potential, but that they're unlikely to succeed at review. You don't want to waste the researcher's time either. So it is actually really valuable to get a desk reject sometimes. And I come back, so I never mind if researchers come back to me and say, "Gosh, I'm disappointed at the desk reject. Can you give me some additional feedback on that? I really thought we had potential there." And then I'll give additional feedback. Usually it's more generic because of the volume of submissions, but even that very general feedback is important to keep in mind. Um, Sometimes, and this is a major challenge, I don't think we can address this yet, but we are living in a very different landscape, working in a very different landscape. I'm seeing a lot of submissions that I'm convinced are generated, by AI. And that's a problem because they're not going to advance knowledge. So we're looking at trying to tease out what is authentic research as well as what's good authentic research. So there's layers now that editors have to work through. So I would say that if you get a desk reject, look at what's in that and be very, very honest with yourself as well. Okay, it can be a very tough conversation to have. Was your paper ready for that journal? Is it a good fit for that journal, or is there more work required? And what kind of journal would be a good fit for that? Sorry, Bonnie, I talked more than I meant to there.
No, that's fine. Yes, very much so with the with AI generated ones, systematic literature reviews on a certain area where there's, very short sections and bullet point lists and these, so I don't think that's really a good strategy, actually, at this point. We're working out as editors how to deal with this, but they're not high quality papers, and often those papers haven't even looked at the formatting guidelines for the journal. 5 to 8,000 words. What would the way we want them formatted. So, I mean, in a highly competitive environment as well, you need to look at the guidelines very closely for things like formatting. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one last question, if I may. People are curious. Does a rejection mean, or how do you find out if a rejection means a paper is potentially not a good fit versus it's fundamentally flawed?
Post desk rejection, is it, Sean? More so than you, obviously post review, you'll get a good sense, but post desk rejection. First of all, I would say we all know ourselves, straight away in terms of if it's going to be, if there's potential there in that paper. So if you feel there's potential in the paper and you're not sure whether it's a good fit, I would contact the editor. If you think your paper was strong and you're not sure why it didn't go for review for that journal and you don't feel there was enough feedback in the initial email, I would then pursue it. I would ask very nicely, very politely. And usually then we can come back and say, actually, do you know what? I really like this piece here, but it's just not advancing knowledge. It's a really short paper. I sometimes see like 3,000 word papers where they're lovely comments about a key topic, but there's no actual empirical research in it. So you will get very honest feedback from the editors if you seek it, but you may know yourself as well. And I would say as a researcher, we do know our own work, whether we were chancing that, whether we were trying something, or whether we feel actually this was really good. It could have been borderline, and I want to know where to next.
All right, great. Unfortunately, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Note that for all of the questions we haven't gotten to, we will follow up in a blog post and that you'll receive that in an email after today's call. You'll receive in the next week or so a certificate of attendance. You'll receive a link to the slides, to the recording. So everything that we've promised, you'll have over to you via email. Thank you to everyone who is joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists for today's lovely conversation. We appreciate all of your time today and hope to see you in a future webinar. Thank you.